The balance of political power in the Senate rests entirely in the hands of Georgia voters now. One group is proving to be a critical force at the polls. According to a new Washington Post article, the long history of black women organizing in Georgia may decide which political party gains control of the Senate. I want to bring in the author of that article, Professor Danielle Phillips-Cunningham. She is the director of Multicultural Women's and Gender Studies program at Texas Women's University. Great to have you with us, Professor. So how are black women in Georgia trying to turn out Democratic voters for the Senate runoff races?
Well, thank you first for having me on your show. Black women are being tenacious as usual. Getting out everyone to vote. This is something that Black women have been doing for well over a century. So Black women organizers today are building upon and continuing this rich tradition of Black women's organizing that dates back to the late 19th century.
Well, you write about the work being done by women like Stacey Abrams, LaTosha Brown, Erin Haynes, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and how it's all a continuation of that history. Could you tell us why black women were so important to Biden's win and how they intend to keep that going into the Senate runoff races?
Well, they were instrumental in getting out many people to vote, right? So they've been doing this work well in advance of the election. They have sustained networks and they have been connecting with voters across race, across class for several centuries. And again, this dates back also to the late 19th century. One thing that I mentioned in the article is the Washing Society, which was formed in 1881 in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're talking, not too long after emancipation. And so Black women, especially in Georgia, have been asserting political leadership and have been organizing, building coalitions before they even had the legal right to vote. And as we know, it took decades for Black women to vote, to have the full support of the laws right behind them to Black women have been asserting political leadership. The Washing Society was the first Black women's trade organization at a time when most national labor unions did not want to take up the cause of Black women. And so those tenacious women, many of them young, many women in their 20s, were very committed to organizing across racial lines. They canvassed in Black and white neighborhoods. They were able to get a few Irish immigrant women to join the Washing Society. And so that took a lot of skill. I think it's important to not only recognize the on-the-ground and physical labor that Black women are doing, but also the intellectual work that is very integral to the physical labor of canvassing, having conversations with people and convincing them to vote for measures and candidates that will strengthen our democracy. And so they've been doing that for centuries. I also mentioned Selena Sloan Butler, who is a graduate of Spelman College, and she was one of the first to start the criminal justice reform movement in this country. And so she collected data that did not exist. And so the skill in really collecting the statistics of the mass incarceration of Black women, children, and men took a lot of intellect and savvy work and research. And she circulated that research across the world. These women traveled to Europe, across the United States.
Groundwork, really, yes. Yes, groundwork that certainly has been forged over generations. And as you heard me say in my introduction, that the control of the entire U.S. Senate could ultimately come down to a few votes in Georgia. And as you were discussing that, Professor, our viewers were seeing photos, signs of Stacey Abrams. We do know that her gubernatorial loss really fired up Black women in Georgia to organize, to get people to turn out. President Trump's rhetoric also was a source of fuel. We do also understand, however, that Georgia went for Biden. That was a victory. And whenever we come to non-presidential elections, voter turnout becomes an issue. How are Black women organizers in Georgia trying to overcome the apathy that happens when you do have a win, when you don't have President Trump on the ballot anymore?
Yeah, I think that's important in terms of, again, recognizing the history of Black women's organizing, because many organizers today point to that history, right? They point even to the Voting Rights Act and how that has been chipped away over time. And so also reminding people of the history and some of the rights that have been rolled back within the past 4 years has been instrumental in getting people out, getting out to vote. And some of the voter suppression tactics that we see now date back to the 19th century. That's why, we have to talk about this in a historical context, because we're seeing just the very blatant, discounting of ballots, voter intimidation at the polls. These are old tactics that people have been using, and so we have really gone back several decades. And so reminding people of that history, I think it's significant that Warnock comes from Ebenezer Baptist Church. That Ebenezer Baptist Church was a critical site of organizing against voter suppression in Atlanta. So that history is so important, and it's what fuels us.
Absolutely. Well, I have you really quickly, Professor. I want to switch gears to another issue that you're studying. How has the pandemic impacted minority students seeking higher education?
Well, it's been very tough, as we know, especially African American and Latinx communities have been hit hard by the pandemic. I teach at a predominantly women's university where most of our students are African American and Latinx. And so those communities have been hit hard. And so what I am inspired by to see that our enrollment actually didn't go down that much this year, because students are committed more than ever to still pursuing their college education, but they've had to make a lot of sacrifices to do so. So it's been hard, and so there are many obstacles in the way, but I still see many students forging ahead.
All right, Professor Danielle Phillips-Cunningham, I could speak with you all day. I've appreciated you coming on.
Okay, thank you.